The gunshot that tore through the midnight silence of Pueblo, Colorado, in the summer of 1875, changed Danielle James's life forever. She stood frozen in the doorway of her father's general store, watching in horror as the only family she had left crumpled to the floor, his blood pooling around the weathered floorboards. Her mother had insisted on polishing every Sunday before consumption had claimed her 3 winters ago. "Papa!" Danielle cried, rushing to his side as the masked robber fled through the back door, heavy sacks of money clutched in his gloved hands. She cradled her father's head, the silver streaks in his dark hair now matted with crimson. His eyes, usually so full of life and laughter, now stared vacantly at the ceiling. 2 days later, with her father buried beside her mother in the small cemetery at the edge of town, 22-year-old Danielle sat alone in the empty store, surrounded by shelves of goods and absolutely no idea what to do next. The bank would foreclose soon enough. Women didn't run businesses in Pueblo, not alone anyway. "Miss James," Sheriff Miller's voice pulled her from her thoughts. The older man stood awkwardly, hat in hand. "I'm mighty sorry, but I've got some news you should hear." Danielle braced herself. "What is it?" "We caught the man who killed your pa." The sheriff twisted his hat nervously. "He's locked up in the jail, but there's something else. Found this in his pocket." He extended a crumpled letter that made Danielle's blood run cold as she read. The letter detailed plans for the robbery plans that included eliminating the store owner. What made her hands shake was the signature at the bottom. Walter Preston, her father's business competitor from the next town over. "Preston's vanished," the sheriff explained. "Left town the same night. We've got men looking, but—" He trailed off, the implication clear. Preston was likely long gone. That night, Danielle made a decision. She couldn't stay in Pueblo, not with the store about to be taken and the constant reminder of her father's murder. With nothing but a small trunk containing her clothes, her mother's locket, and the money her father had hidden in a tin behind the counter, Danielle purchased a stagecoach ticket west to a place where no one would know her name: Silver Creek, Arizona Territory. The journey was long and arduous. Danielle spent 4 days on various stagecoaches, each one more uncomfortable than the last. Her black mourning dress attracted pitying looks from fellow travelers, but she kept to herself, responding with polite but brief replies when engaged in conversation. By the time the stagecoach rolled into Silver Creek, Danielle was exhausted, dusty, and questioning her impulsive decision. The small frontier town was nothing like Pueblo. Where Pueblo had cobblestone streets and brick buildings, Silver Creek was a collection of wooden structures lining a single dirt road, the majestic mountains rising in the distance. "End of the line, miss," the driver called, helping her down from the coach. Danielle stood in the street, trunk at her feet, watching as the stagecoach continued on its journey. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she could feel sweat trickling down her back beneath the heavy black fabric of her dress. "You look like you could use some shade," a female voice said. Danielle turned to see a plump woman in her 50s standing on the boardwalk, her kind face creased with concern. "Name's Martha Owens. I run the boarding house just yonder." "Danielle James," she replied, offering her hand. "I'm new to town." Martha's warm smile was the first genuine kindness Danielle had encountered in days. "Well, Miss James, why don't you come along with me? I've got a room available and you look like you could use a rest and a meal." The boarding house was simple but clean, with 6 rooms upstairs and a common dining area below. Martha showed Danielle to a small corner room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the mountains. "Dinner's at 6, Martha explained. "You'll meet some of the other boarders then." There's fresh water in the pitcher for washing up." Left alone, Danielle sank onto the bed and finally allowed the tears she'd been holding back to flow freely. She cried for her father, for the life she'd lost, and for the uncertain future stretching before her. When the tears finally subsided, she washed her face and changed into her one other dress, a simple navy blue that wasn't quite as somber as her mourning clothes, but still respectable. At dinner, Danielle met the other boarders, a schoolteacher named Miss Perkins, an elderly gentleman who worked at the assay office, and a young couple who had just arrived to open a photography studio. Martha kept the conversation flowing, subtly deflecting questions when she sensed Danielle's reluctance to discuss her past. "You planning to stay long in Silver Creek?" Martha asked as she served apple pie for dessert. Danielle hesitated. I'm not sure yet. I need to find work." "What skills do you have, dear?" Miss Perkins inquired. "I help my father run our general store," Danielle replied. "I can keep accounts, order inventory, and I'm good with customers." Martha brightened. "Well now, that's fortunate. Old Mr. Wilson at the Mercantile was just saying yesterday he needs someone to help out. His arthritis is acting up something fierce, and he can't manage all the heavy lifting and bookkeeping like he used to." The next morning, dressed in her navy dress with her hair pinned neatly back, Danielle made her way to Wilson's Mercantile. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and she was immediately struck by how similar yet different it was from her father's store. The layout was much the same, but the smell was different, more leather and tobacco than the coffee and sugar scents she was used to. Mr. Wilson, a stooped man with a shock of white hair, peered at her over wire-rimmed spectacles. "Can I help you, miss?" "Mr. Wilson, my name is Danielle James. Martha Owens mentioned you might be looking for help in the store." The old man's face brightened. "Indeed I am. Martha sent a note round this morning saying you might come by. She speaks highly of you." "That's kind of her, considering we only just met," Danielle replied with a small smile. "Martha's a good judge of character," Mr. Wilson said. "Now, tell me about your experience." For the next hour, Danielle explained her background, carefully omitting the tragic circumstances of her departure from Pueblo. Mr. Wilson nodded approvingly throughout her explanation. "Well, Miss James, it seems you're exactly what I've been looking for. When can you start?" "Right now, if you'd like." And so Danielle began her new life in Silver Creek, working 6 days a week at the Mercantile. The work was familiar and comforting, giving her days structure and purpose. Mr. Wilson was a fair employer, and she quickly learned the inventory and the regular customers. 2 weeks after her arrival, Danielle was arranging a display of canned goods when the bell above the door jingled. She turned with her customary greeting on her lips, but faltered at the sight of the man who entered. He was taller than most men she'd encountered, with broad shoulders and a lean build beneath a dusty denim shirt and worn leather vest. A battered brown hat sat atop sun-streaked dark blonde hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was tanned and weathered from the sun, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's worth of stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a startling blue that reminded her of the Colorado sky in October. He removed his hat as he stepped inside, revealing a respectful nature that contrasted with his rugged appearance. "Afternoon," he said, nodding first to her and then to Mr. Wilson, who was helping another customer. "Good afternoon," Danielle replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "Is there something I can help you find?" The stranger's gaze lingered on her face a moment longer than was strictly proper before he answered. "Need some supplies. Just got hired on at the Circle M Ranch." "Congratulations," she said, gesturing toward the rear of the store. "What sort of supplies do you need?" "Basic provisions. Coffee, flour, beans, Some tobacco. He followed her toward the shelves. Haven't seen you here before. I'm relatively new to town, she admitted. I'm Danielle James. Brock Evans, he replied, extending a calloused hand. When she placed her smaller one in it, his grip was firm but gentle. Pleasure to meet you, Miss James. There was something about his direct gaze that unsettled her, as though he could see past the careful facade she'd constructed. She withdrew her hand and gestured to the shelves. The coffee's just here. How much would you like? As she helped him gather his supplies, she learned that Brock Evans had been hired as the new ranch foreman at the Circle M, one of the largest cattle operations in the territory. He'd arrived in Silver Creek just 3 days earlier after spending several years working ranches across Texas and New Mexico. What brought you to Arizona territory? She asked as she calculated his purchases. Time for a change, he said simply. And the Circle M has a good reputation. Mr. Marshall runs a fair operation. The name caught Danielle's attention. Marshall, as in Jonathan Marshall, Brock nodded. That's right, you know him. Only by reputation, she said, though in truth, she'd overheard plenty about the wealthy rancher from the gossip at the boarding house. Jonathan Marshall was the most prosperous man in the territory, a widower in his 50s who had built the Circle M from nothing. His only child, a daughter named Rebecca, had been sent back east for schooling years ago and rarely returned to Silver Creek. That'll be $2.45, Danielle said, totaling his purchases. Brock paid and gathered his supplies. As he turned to leave, he paused. Miss James, the town's having a social this Saturday night. Will you be attending? The question caught her off guard. I hadn't planned on it. You should consider it, he said with a slight smile. Might be a good way to meet more folks in town. With a tip of his hat, he was gone, the bell jingling in his wake. That's Brock Evans, Mr. Wilson said, coming to stand beside her. Just hired on as Marshall's new foreman after old Pete retired. Heard he's got quite a reputation as a cattleman. Is that so? Danielle murmured, her eyes still on the door. Good man, from what I hear. Fought for the Union in the war, though he'd have been just a boy then. Been working ranches ever since. Danielle nodded absently, returning to her task of arranging the display. She told herself the flutter in her chest was simply the result of speaking to a stranger, nothing more. She had no business noticing handsome cowboys, not when she was still in mourning and trying to build a new life. Saturday evening arrived, and despite her earlier reluctance, Danielle found herself standing before the small mirror in her room, pinning the last strands of her chestnut hair into a simple updo. Martha had been insistent that she attend the social, arguing that it wasn't healthy for a young woman to spend every evening alone in her room. Besides, Martha had added with a knowing smile, I saw that handsome new foreman from the Circle M asking after you yesterday. The thought that Brock Evans had inquired about her sent a warmth through Danielle that she quickly tamped down. She was not here for romance or attachment. Her experience had taught her that attachments only led to heartbreak. The social was held in the town hall, a large wooden structure that served multiple purposes for the small community. When Danielle arrived with Martha, the building was already filled with people, the air warm from bodies packed close together and the sound of fiddles and a piano creating a lively atmosphere. Danielle, Martha, Miss Perkins waved from near the refreshment table. Come join us. For the first hour, Danielle stayed close to the women she knew from the boarding house, sipping punch and observing the dancers. Several young men approached to ask her to dance, but she politely declined, claiming fatigue from the long week at the store. You can't hide by the punch bowl all evening, Martha chided gently. It's just a dance, not a marriage proposal. Before Danielle could respond, a familiar deep voice spoke from behind her. Miss James, I was hoping you'd be here." She turned to find Brock Evans standing there, looking remarkably different from the dusty cowboy who had entered the store days earlier. He was clean-shaven, his hair damp and combed back from his forehead. He wore a crisp white shirt, dark vest, and clean trousers, though his boots were still well worn. "Mr. Evans," she acknowledged with a nod. "It's nice to see you again. Would you do me the honor of this dance?" he asked, extending his hand. Martha gave her a gentle nudge, and before Danielle could formulate an excuse, she found herself being led onto the dance floor. The musicians had just begun a waltz, and Brock placed his hand respectfully at her waist, keeping a proper distance between them as they began to move to the music. "I was beginning to think you were going to spend the entire evening avoiding the dance floor," he said with a slight smile. "I was simply enjoying the company and the music," she replied. "And avoiding every man who approached you," he observed. His directness caught her off guard again. "I'm not much for dancing," she admitted. "You dance very well for someone who claims not to enjoy it," he said as he guided her smoothly through a turn. Danielle couldn't help but smile. "My mother insisted I learn. She said a lady should know how to dance properly, even if she never has occasion to do so." "Your mother was wise," Brock said. "Where are your parents now? Still in wherever you came from?" The question dimmed her smile. "They're both gone. My mother passed 3 years ago and my father more recently." His expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss James. That can't have been easy." "Thank you," she said quietly. "What about your family, Mr. Evans?" "My pa died at Gettysburg. Ma passed on 5 years back. I've got a brother somewhere in California, but we haven't kept in touch." "I'm sorry," she said, recognizing the same aloneness in him that she felt herself. They danced in companionable silence for a moment before he spoke again. "So what brought you to Silver Creek, if you don't mind my asking?" "A fresh start," she said simply, offering the same explanation he had given for his own arrival. His lips quirked into a smile that reached his eyes. "Seems we have that in common." When the dance ended, Brock escorted her back to where Martha stood with a knowing smile. "May I bring you some punch, Miss James?" he asked. "That would be lovely, thank you." As he walked away, Martha leaned close. My, the new foreman seems quite taken with you." "Don't be ridiculous," Danielle protested. "He's just being polite." "If that's politeness, then I've never seen it before," Martha replied with a laugh. "The man hasn't taken his eyes off you since you arrived." Before Danielle could respond, Brock returned with 2 cups of punch. He remained by her side for the next hour, introducing her to several of the ranch hands from the Circle M, and engaging her in conversation about books they had both read. Danielle found herself relaxing in his company, even laughing at his dry observations about some of the more colorful characters in town. As the evening wore on, he asked her to dance twice more, and each time, she found herself more aware of his physical presence, the clean scent of soap that clung to him, the strength in his hand as it held hers, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. When the social finally ended, Brock offered to walk her and Martha back to the boarding house. The night air was cool and refreshing after the heat of the town hall. "I enjoyed your company this evening, Miss James," he said as they reached the boarding house porch. "As did I, Mr. Evans," she replied honestly. "I was wondering if you might consider joining me for a picnic tomorrow after church. The weather's supposed to be fine, and there's a nice spot by the creek just outside of town." The invitation surprised her. You should accept, Danielle," Martha interjected. "It's your day off, after all." Brock's eyes remained on Danielle, waiting for her answer. There was something in his direct gaze that made it difficult to refuse. "That would be nice, Mr. Evans," she finally said. "Thank you." His smile was immediate and warm. "I'll call for you at 1 o'clock if that suits." "Yes, that would be fine." After he bid them both good night and strode away into the darkness, Martha turned to Danielle with a gleeful expression. "Well, it seems our quiet Miss James has caught the eye of the most eligible new bachelor in Silver Creek." "It's just a picnic, Martha," Danielle protested as they entered the house. "Of course it is, dear," Martha replied, not bothering to hide her smile. "Just a picnic." That night, Danielle lay awake long after she should have been asleep, thinking about Brock Evans. There was something about him, a steadiness, a quiet confidence that drew her to him despite her resolve to remain detached. Perhaps it was just that he was the first person to show interest in her as a woman since she'd arrived. Or perhaps it was the hint of sadness she recognized behind his smile, a reflection of her own loss. Whatever it was, she knew she should be careful. Getting attached to anyone or anything in Silver Creek wasn't part of her plan. She had come here to escape, to hide, to heal, not to begin a new attachment that could lead to more pain. Yet when she finally drifted off to sleep, it was with thoughts of blue eyes and a gentle smile that followed her into her dreams. The next day dawned bright and clear, with the kind of crisp blue sky that made the mountains look close enough to touch. Danielle attended the small church service with Martha and the other boarders, trying not to let her gaze wander in search of a particular tall figure among the congregation. She spotted him as they were leaving, standing with a group of men she recognized as other ranch hands from the Circle M. He caught her eye and touched the brim of his hat in greeting, a subtle acknowledgement that brought an unbidden smile to her lips. Back at the boarding house, Danielle changed from her church dress into a simple blue skirt and white shirtwaist, then packed a small bag with a book and a shawl in case the afternoon grew cool. Martha had provided a basket of food when she learned of the picnic, waving away Danielle's protests with a wink. At precisely 1 o'clock, there was a knock at the front door. Danielle descended the stairs to find Brock standing in the foyer, hat in hand, looking freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt beneath his vest. "Miss James," he greeted her with a slight bow. "You look lovely." "Thank you, Mr. Evans," she replied, feeling unaccountably nervous. "And thank you for the invitation." "The pleasure is mine," he said, taking the basket from her hands. "I've got my horse tied up outside if you don't mind riding. The spot I was thinking of is a little ways out of town." Danielle hesitated. "I haven't ridden in some time." "Belle's gentle as a lamb," he assured her, "and I'll be right there the whole time." Outside, a beautiful chestnut mare stood patiently beside a larger bay gelding. Brock secured the basket and her bag to his saddle, then helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist as he lifted her into the side saddle. "You're right," Danielle said, stroking the mare's neck. "She seems very gentle." Brock mounted his own horse with the easy grace of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. "Ready," she nodded, and they set off at a leisurely pace, riding side by side when the trail was wide enough to permit it. Brock pointed out landmarks as they rode, telling her about the area and its history. Danielle found herself relaxing in his company, enjoying the warm sunshine and the beautiful scenery. After about 20 minutes, they reached a bend in the creek where a small grassy clearing was shaded by cottonwood trees. A flat rock formation provided a natural table, and the sound of the water flowing over stones created a peaceful backdrop. "This is beautiful," Danielle said as Brock helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "I found it my second day here," he explained, tethering the horses where they could graze. "Thought it would be a nice place to bring someone special." The implication that he considered her special brought a flush to Danielle's cheeks. She busied herself with spreading the blanket Martha had provided while Brock unpacked the basket. "Martha's outdone herself," he commented, surveying the fried chicken, biscuits, apple pie, and bottle of lemonade. "Seems she approves of this outing." "Martha seems determined to see me settled," Danielle admitted with a small laugh. "She thinks a young woman shouldn't be alone." "And what do you think?" Brock asked, his blue eyes serious as he handed her a plate. Danielle considered the question carefully. "I think I've learned that being alone is safer than depending on others who might be taken from you." Something in his expression told her he understood exactly what she meant. "Loss is hard," he agreed quietly. "My pa used to say that the deeper the grief, the greater the love that came before it. Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Brock said, a shadow crossing his face. "Taught me everything important I know: honor, respect, treating others fairly." He paused. "He'd have liked you, I think." The simple statement touched her more deeply than she expected. "I would have liked to meet him." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the rushing of the creek and the occasional call of a bird. Danielle found herself studying Brock's profile when he wasn't looking: the strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar near his right eyebrow, the way the sunlight brought out golden highlights in his hair. "Tell me about where you're from," he said eventually. "You never mentioned." Danielle tensed slightly. "Pueblo, Colorado. What was it like there?" She chose her words carefully. "It was growing, bigger than Silver Creek. My father owned the general store." "And you helped him run it," Brock guessed. "That's why you're so good at Wilson's Place." She nodded. "I practically grew up in that store, learned to count by sorting nails into bins." "What happened?" he asked gently. "To make you leave?" Danielle looked away, focusing on the flowing water of the creek. "After my father died, there was nothing left for me there." Brock didn't press further, seeming to sense her reluctance to elaborate. Instead, he changed the subject, telling her about his years working on different ranches, the places he'd seen, the characters he'd met. His stories were engaging and often funny, and Danielle found herself laughing more than she had in months. As the afternoon progressed, they walked along the creek, skipping stones across the water and discovering a family of ducks nesting in the reeds. When Danielle slipped on a mossy rock, Brock caught her before she could fall, his arm strong around her waist. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, see the varying shades of blue in his eyes. Something passed between them, a connection, a recognition before he gently set her back on her feet. "Careful there," he murmured, his voice deeper than before. The ride back to town was quieter, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains as they reached the boarding house, casting everything in a golden glow. Brock helped her dismount, his hands sure and strong at her waist. "Thank you for coming with me today, Miss James. Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Evans." "I had a wonderful time." He hesitated, still standing close. "Would it be too forward to ask if I might call on you again?" Danielle knew she should refuse. Getting closer to anyone was a risk she'd promised herself she wouldn't take. Yet looking up into his earnest face, she found herself unable to say no. "I would like that," she said softly. His smile was immediate and transformative, lighting up his entire face. "How about next Sunday?" Next Sunday would be perfect. As he mounted his horse to leave, he tipped his hat to her. "Until then, Miss James." Danielle watched him ride away, a strange mixture of anticipation and trepidation swirling inside her. When she finally turned to enter the boarding house, she found Martha watching from the window with an unmistakable look of satisfaction. "Don't say it," Danielle warned as she stepped inside. "I wasn't going to say a word," Martha replied, though her smile said plenty. "Not a single word." Over the next few weeks, Brock called on Danielle regularly. Each Sunday, he would take her riding or to a picnic or simply for a walk through town. Sometimes they would just sit on the boarding house porch and talk for hours, discovering shared interests and views on everything from books to politics. Danielle found herself looking forward to their time together, counting the days between their meetings. She learned that beneath his quiet exterior, Brock was thoughtful and well-read, having educated himself despite limited formal schooling. He made her laugh with his wry observations and listened intently when she spoke, as if her words were the most important thing he'd ever heard. Word spread quickly in the small town about the blossoming relationship between the mercantile clerk and the Circle MTK's new foreman. Danielle endured knowing looks and gentle teasing from customers and fellow boarders alike. Even Mr. Wilson commented on how she seemed more cheerful on Mondays after those Sunday outings. One Wednesday afternoon in late September, as Danielle was closing up the mercantile, she was surprised to see Brock walking toward the store. He rarely came to town midweek due to his duties at the ranch. "Brock," she greeted him, unable to keep the smile from her face. They had progressed to using first names after their third outing. "This is unexpected." "I hope it's not unwelcome," he replied, removing his hat. "I need to speak with you about something important." His serious tone made her heart skip. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," he assured her. "But Mr. Marshall is sending me to Tucson on business tomorrow. I'll be gone for about 2 weeks. "Oh," Danielle said, surprised at the disappointment that washed over her. "That's quite a while." "It is," he agreed, stepping closer. "Which is why I wanted to see you before I left to ask you something." Danielle's pulse quickened. "Yes." "There's going to be a harvest dance the Saturday after I return," he said. "I was hoping you would agree to attend with me." He hesitated, then continued with determination. "As my sweetheart." The word hung in the air between them. They had never formally defined what they were to each other, though their growing closeness had made it increasingly clear to everyone in town. Danielle began, uncertain how to respond. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to embrace the happiness she felt in his company. But another part, the part that still woke from nightmares about her father's murder, was afraid. Seeing her hesitation, Brock took her hand in his. "I know you've been through something difficult, Danielle. I don't know exactly what happened in Pueblo, but I can see it still haunts you. I'm not asking for promises, just a chance to show you that not all attachments end in pain." His words, so close to what she needed to hear, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "How did you know?" "Because I see you," he said simply. "The real you behind the smile you put on for everyone else." Danielle looked up into his earnest face and made a decision. "Yes," she said softly. "I would be honored to attend the dance as your sweetheart." The smile that spread across his face was worth any risk. Before she realized what was happening, Brock leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek, his lips warm against her skin. "I'll think of you every day I'm gone," he promised. "Be safe," she replied. After he left, Danielle touched her fingers to the spot where his lips had been, a strange warmth spreading through her. For the first time since her father's death, she felt something like hope blooming in her chest. The 2 weeks of Brock's absence passed with excruciating slowness. Danielle threw herself into her work at the mercantile, taking inventory, organizing displays, and even helping Mr. Wilson rearrange some of the heavier items, anything to keep her mind occupied. In the evenings, she wrote long entries in her journal, examining her feelings for Brock with both excitement and trepidation. She had come to Silver Creek to escape, not to form attachments. Yet in Brock Evans, She had found someone who seemed to understand the shadows that haunted her without needing to know their exact shape. 12 days after Brock's departure, Danielle was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the Mercantile when the daily stagecoach rolled into town. She didn't pay it much attention until she heard a familiar voice call her name. Looking up, her heart leaped at the sight of Brock striding toward her, looking tired but happy. She barely had time to set aside the broom before he reached her, taking both her hands in his. "You're back early," she said, unable to keep the delight from her voice. "Finished the business faster than expected," he replied. His eyes roamed her face as if memorizing it anew. "I missed you." "I missed you too," she admitted, surprising herself with the ease of the confession. His smile softened. "Are we still on for the dance this Saturday?" "Of course," she assured him. "I've been looking forward to it." A throat cleared behind them, and they turned to find Mr. Wilson standing in the doorway, an amused expression on his lined face. "While I'm sure Miss James is delighted to see you, Mr. Evans, she does have work to finish." "Of course, sir," Brock said with a respectful nod. "I apologize for the interruption." He turned back to Danielle. "I'll call for you Saturday at 6. I'll be ready," she promised. As Brock walked away, Mr. Wilson chuckled. "That young man has it bad, Miss James, and if I'm not mistaken, so do you." Danielle blushed but didn't deny it. She was falling in love with Brock Evans, and the realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. Saturday evening arrived clear and cool, with the scent of autumn in the air. Danielle had splurged on a new dress for the occasion, a deep green that complemented her chestnut hair and fair complexion. Martha helped her arrange her hair in a more elaborate style than usual, with soft curls framing her face. "You look beautiful, dear," Martha said, stepping back to admire her work. "Brock Evans won't know what hit him." At precisely 6 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Danielle descended the stairs to find Brock waiting in the foyer, looking more handsome than ever in a new dark suit, white shirt, and string tie. In his hand was a small bouquet of wildflowers. For a moment, he simply stared at her, his expression one of wonder. "Danielle," he finally managed. "You look— I don't have the words." "Thank you," she replied softly, accepting the flowers. "You look very handsome yourself." The harvest dance was held in the town hall, which had been decorated with autumn leaves, corn husks, and lanterns that cast a warm glow over everything. It seemed the entire town had turned out for the event, and as Brock and Danielle entered together, she was acutely aware of the eyes that turned their way. "Everyone's staring," she whispered. "That's because you're the most beautiful woman in the room," Brock replied, his hand warm at the small of her back. The evening passed in a whirl of dancing, laughter, and conversation. Brock kept her close, introducing her to people she hadn't yet met in town and making sure her punch glass was never empty. When the musicians began a slow waltz, he led her onto the floor and drew her closer than was strictly proper, though still within the bounds of decency. "I've been thinking about something," he said as they moved together to the music. "What's that?" she asked, looking up at him. "About how sometimes life gives you a second chance when you least expect it." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "I wasn't looking for anything when I came to Silver Creek. Just a job, a fresh start. And then I walked into Wilson's Mercantile and saw you, and suddenly everything changed." Danielle's heart raced at his words. "Brock, you don't have to say anything," he assured her. "I just wanted you to know that meeting you has been the best thing that's happened to me in a very long time." The music ended, and Brock suggested they step outside for some air. The night was cool but pleasant, with stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds. They walked to a bench beneath an old oak tree, far enough from the town hall for privacy, but still within sight of the building's warm glow. "It's a beautiful night," Danielle commented, pulling her shawl closer around her shoulders. Beautiful, Brock agreed, though he was looking at her, not the sky. A comfortable silence settled between them before Danielle gathered her courage to speak. What you said in there about second chances, I've been thinking about that too. Have you? He turned toward her on the bench, his knee brushing against her skirt. She nodded. When I came here, I was running from memories, from pain. I didn't want to get close to anyone. I was afraid. And now, his voice was soft, encouraging. Now I'm still afraid, she admitted. But not of the same things. I'm afraid of missing out on something wonderful because I'm too scared to take a chance. Brock reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. Danielle, I would never hurt you, not willingly. I know that, she said, squeezing his hand. That's why I want to tell you the truth. About why I left Pueblo. For the next quarter hour, Danielle told him everything: her father's murder, the discovery that it had been orchestrated by his business rival, her fear and flight to Silver Creek. Brock listened without interrupting, his thumb making soothing circles on the back of her hand. When she finally finished, tears glistening in her eyes, he reached up to gently brush them away. Thank you for trusting me with this. I should have told you sooner, she said. You told me when you were ready, he replied. That's all that matters. You're not troubled by it, she asked hesitantly. Troubled that you witnessed something so horrible, of course. Troubled that you ran to protect yourself. Never. His gaze was steady, reassuring. You did what you had to do. Anyone would have done the same. Relief washed over Danielle at his understanding. I've been so afraid that the past would find me somehow, that Preston would discover where I went. If he ever did, Brock said, a steely edge entering his voice, he'd have me to deal with. I won't let anyone hurt you, Danielle. The conviction in his voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Before she could respond, Brock leaned forward, his intent clear. Danielle closed her eyes as his lips met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. His hand came up to cup her cheek, and she leaned into his touch, returning the kiss with a tentative passion that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, Brock rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since the day I met you, he confessed. I'm glad you waited until now, she replied softly. It made it all the more special. The sound of the town hall door opening broke the moment. Brock stood, offering her his hand. Shall we go back inside? I believe I promised you every dance. Danielle smiled, taking his hand and rising to her feet. Yes, you did, and I intend to hold you to it. As they walked back to the town hall, hand in hand beneath the starlight, Danielle felt something settle within her, a certainty that whatever the future held, she was no longer facing it alone. The weeks following the harvest dance were the happiest Danielle had known since before her mother's illness. She and Brock settled into a rhythm, with him coming to town whenever his duties at the Circle M permitted. They would take walks, have dinner at the small restaurant near the stagecoach station, or simply sit on the boarding house porch and talk for hours. Each time they parted, their goodbye kisses grew longer and more meaningful. Danielle found herself thinking about Brock at odd moments throughout the day, wondering what he was doing. If he was thinking of her too, counting the hours until they would see each other again. By early November, it was clear to everyone in Silver Creek that Brock Evans and Danielle James were seriously courting. Mr. Wilson gave Danielle a knowing smile whenever Brock came to the store, and Martha took to humming wedding tunes whenever Danielle mentioned his name. One crisp Saturday morning, Brock arrived at the boarding house on horseback, leading a second mount. I thought we might ride out to the foothills today, he suggested when Danielle came outside to greet him. The aspen trees are turning gold, and there's a view I want to show you. The day was perfect for riding, cool but sunny, with a sky so blue It hurt to look at it. They rode side by side when the trail allowed, talking easily about everything and nothing. Danielle had become a more confident rider under Brock's tutelage, and she enjoyed the freedom of being on horseback, the wind in her hair and the rhythmic movement beneath her. After about an hour's ride, they reached a ridge overlooking the valley. Below them, Silver Creek looked like a child's toy town, nestled among the pines. Beyond it, the vast expanse of rangeland stretched toward the horizon, broken only by the silvery thread of the creek that gave the town its name. "It's breathtaking," Danielle said, gazing out at the panorama. "This is where I come when I need to think," Brock explained, dismounting and helping her down from her horse. "There's something about seeing everything from up here that helps put problems in perspective." They spread a blanket on a flat rock and shared the lunch Martha had packed for them. The air was cool at this elevation, and Danielle was glad for the warm shawl she had brought along. After they ate, Brock seemed uncharacteristically quiet, almost nervous. He kept reaching into his pocket, then stopping himself. "Is everything all right?" Danielle finally asked. Brock took a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you, and I'm not sure how you're going to take it." A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran through her. "What is it?" "I received a telegram yesterday," he said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "From the sheriff in Pueblo." Danielle froze. "How did he know to contact you?" "I wrote to him," Brock admitted, "after you told me about what happened to your father." "You what?" Danielle stood abruptly, her heart pounding. "How could you do that without telling me?" Brock rose as well, his expression earnest. "Danielle, please let me explain. I couldn't bear seeing the fear in your eyes whenever you mentioned Pueblo or your father's murderer. I wanted to help. By going behind my back." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. "I just asked him if Walter Preston had ever been caught," Brock said. "I didn't tell him where you were or anything about you, I swear." Danielle looked away, trying to process this revelation. Part of her was angry at Brock's presumption, but another part recognized that he had acted out of concern for her. "What did the sheriff say?" she finally asked, her voice tight. Brock held out the telegram. "Read it yourself." With trembling fingers, Danielle took the paper and unfolded it. "Preston caught, stop confessed to murder, stop hanged yesterday, stop case closed, stop." She read the words 3 times before they fully registered. Walter Preston was dead. The man who had ordered her father's murder, who had haunted her nightmares for months, was gone. Justice had been served without her testimony, without her ever having to return to Pueblo. "He's dead," she whispered, looking up at Brock with wide eyes. "It's over. It's over," Brock confirmed softly. "You're safe, Danielle. You don't have to run anymore." The enormity of it hit her all at once, the relief, the closure, the realization that she was truly free. Her legs gave way and she sank back onto the blanket. Brock was beside her in an instant, his arm around her shoulders. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you I was contacting the sheriff," he said. "I should have, but I was afraid it would only bring back painful memories if nothing came of it." Danielle shook her head, tears blurring her vision. "No, you were right. I needed to know this." She looked up at him, seeing the concern in his blue eyes. "Thank you." Brock's expression softened and he brushed a tear from her cheek. "There's something else I wanted to talk to you about today, something I've been thinking about for a while now." "What is it?" she asked, her heart still racing from the news about Preston. To her surprise, Brock shifted position, moving from beside her to kneeling in front of her. He took both of her hands in his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "Danielle James, these past months have been the happiest of my life. From the moment I walked into that mercantile and saw you arranging canned goods, something inside me knew you were special." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "I love you. I love your strength, your kindness, your resilience. I love the way you help old Mrs. Cooper count her pennies even when there's a line of customers waiting. I love how you remember everyone's name and their children's names too. Danielle's breath caught in her throat as she realized what was happening. Brock, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. I know this might seem fast, but when you know something's right, you don't need a lot of time. From the pouch, he produced a simple gold ring with a small pearl set in the center. This was my mother's. I've been carrying it with me since I left home, waiting for the day I'd find someone worthy of it. Tears filled Danielle's eyes again, but for an entirely different reason. It's beautiful, she whispered. Danielle, Brock said, his voice thick with emotion. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? For a moment, Danielle was too overwhelmed to speak. 6 months ago, she had been fleeing Pueblo with nothing but grief and fear as her companions. Now, here she was, being asked to start a new life with a man she had come to love more than she thought possible. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain despite her tears. Yes, Brock Evans, I will marry you. His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Brock rose to his feet, pulling her up with him, and then his arms were around her, lifting her off the ground as he spun her in a circle of pure joy. When he set her down, he kissed her with a passion that left her breathless, his hands cradling her face as if she were the most precious thing in the world. I promise to make you happy, he murmured against her lips. Every single day. You already do, she replied softly. They stayed on the ridge for another hour, making plans for their future together. Brock explained that Mr. Marshall had offered him a small parcel of land at the edge of the Circle M property as part of his compensation package. It's not much, he said, but there's a clearing perfect for building a house and access to water. We could start our own little homestead there. It sounds perfect, Danielle said, leaning against his shoulder as they gazed out at the valley below. When should we be married? How about Christmas? Brock suggested. It's 6 weeks away, enough time to make arrangements, but not so long that I'll go crazy waiting. Danielle laughed. Christmas it is. The ride back to town was filled with excited conversation and frequent stops for kisses. By the time they reached the boarding house, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. Should we tell everyone right away? Danielle asked as Brock helped her dismount. I'm not sure I could keep it secret even if I wanted to, he admitted, his smile so wide it must have hurt his cheeks. I feel like shouting it from the rooftops. Martha was waiting on the porch, as if she had a sixth sense for important news. One look at their beaming faces and the ring on Danielle's finger told her everything she needed to know. Well, it's about time, she exclaimed, rushing forward to embrace them both. Oh, my dears, I'm so happy for you. Word spread quickly through the small town. By the following morning, it seemed everyone knew that Brock Evans and Danielle James were engaged to be married on Christmas Day. Customers at the mercantile offered congratulations. Women stopped Danielle in the street to admire her ring, and Mr. Wilson insisted on closing the store early so he could buy them both a celebratory dinner at the hotel restaurant. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparations. Martha appointed herself unofficial wedding coordinator, helping Danielle sew a simple but elegant wedding dress of ivory satin and organizing a small reception to be held at the boarding house after the ceremony. Brock, meanwhile, began work on their future home. With the help of several Circle M ranch hands, he cleared the site on his land and laid the foundation for a modest cabin. Whenever Danielle could get away from the mercantile, she would ride out to see the progress, thrilled to watch their home taking shape. 2 weeks before the wedding, A cold snap hit Silver Creek, bringing with it the first snow of the season. Danielle stood at the mercantile window, watching the white flakes drift down when the door opened, bringing in a blast of cold air and a familiar figure dusted with snow. "Brock," she exclaimed, hurrying to him. "What are you doing in town? I thought you were working on the cabin today." "Too cold for building," he explained, brushing snow from his coat before bending to kiss her cheek. "And I missed my fiancé." The word still gave Danielle a thrill every time she heard it. "Well, your fiancé is very glad to see you." Mr. Wilson emerged from the back room, nodding a greeting to Brock. "Evans, nasty weather out there." "Getting worse from the look of those clouds," Brock agreed. "They're saying we might be in for a real blizzard." Mr. Wilson frowned. "Might be best if you head back to the ranch before it gets too bad, son." Brock glanced at Danielle, reluctance clear in his expression. "I suppose you're right. Don't want to get caught in it." "I'll walk you out," Danielle offered, reaching for her shawl. Outside, the snow was falling more heavily, the wind beginning to pick up. Brock turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "I'll try to come back in a few days once this passes. Be careful riding back," she urged, concern evident in her voice. "Maybe you should stay in town tonight." He shook his head regretfully. "Mr. Marshall needs all hands at the ranch to make sure the cattle are secure before the worst of the storm hits. I have to get back." Understanding the responsibility he felt, Danielle nodded. "Then go, but promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," he said, pulling her close for a brief but fervent kiss. "I love you. I love you too." She watched him mount his horse and ride away, the snow quickly obscuring his figure as he headed out of town. An uneasy feeling settled in her chest as she returned to the mercantile, though she told herself it was just worry about the coming storm. The blizzard hit that night with a fury that surprised even the oldest residents of Silver Creek. Wind howled down from the mountains, driving snow against windows and piling drifts against doors. By morning, the town was blanketed in white, with some drifts reaching the second-story windows of buildings. For 3 days, the storm raged, effectively cutting Silver Creek off from the outside world. Danielle helped Mr. Wilson distribute emergency supplies to townspeople who braved the weather to reach the mercantile. At night, she lay awake in her room at the boarding house, listening to the wind and wondering if Brock had made it safely back to the Circle M. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white. The sun emerged, glinting off the snow with a brightness that hurt the eyes. As soon as the main street was cleared enough for travel, Danielle saw riders from outlying ranches begin to arrive in town, bringing news and checking on friends and relatives. She was helping a customer when the bell above the door jangled. Looking up expectantly, hoping to see Brock, she instead saw Jonathan Marshall himself, the owner of the Circle M. The tall, distinguished-looking man removed his hat as he entered, snow falling from his long coat. "Mr. Marshall," Mr. Wilson greeted him. "Don't often see you in town yourself." "Special circumstances," Marshall replied, his gaze finding Danielle. "Miss James, might I have a word?" Something in his solemn expression made Danielle's blood run cold. "Of course," she managed to say, moving toward him. "Is it Brock? Is he all right?" Marshall's weathered face was grave. "There was an accident, Miss James. Brock was out checking on a herd during the worst of the storm. His horse returned to the ranch without him." The world seemed to tilt beneath Danielle's feet. "No," she whispered. "Please, no." "We've had search parties out since the storm broke," Marshall continued. "We found signs that he took shelter in an old line shack, but there was a collapse from the snow weight on the roof." Danielle's knees buckled and Mr. Wilson quickly guided her to a chair. Are you saying he's— She couldn't bring herself to say the word. We don't know yet, Marshall said quickly. The men are still digging through the debris. I came to town as soon as we found the shack, thought you should know what's happening. I need to go there, Danielle said, rising unsteadily to her feet. I need to be there. It's a rough ride in these conditions, Marshall warned, and what's happening out there, it might be hard to witness. I don't care, Danielle insisted, her voice growing stronger. He would do the same for me. Please, Mr. Marshall. The rancher studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. My men brought an extra horse, if you're sure. I'm sure, she said, already reaching for her coat. The ride to the line shack was grueling. Though the storm had passed, the temperature remained bitterly cold, and the deep snow made travel slow and difficult. Danielle's face was numb from the wind, her hands stiff inside her gloves, but she barely noticed the discomfort. Her thoughts were entirely on Brock. When they finally reached the site, Danielle's heart sank at the sight that greeted them. What had once been a small wooden structure was now largely a pile of timber and snow. 6 men were working to clear the debris, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Any sign? Marshall called as they dismounted. One of the men, a grizzled cowboy Danielle recognized as the Circle MTK's cook, shook his head. Nothing yet, boss. But we found his saddlebag under some of the wood, so he was definitely here. Danielle moved forward, her boots sinking into the snow. Let me help. The men exchanged glances, clearly uncertain about having a woman join their grim task. But something in Danielle's expression must have convinced them. The cook nodded and handed her a pair of heavy gloves. Be careful of nails and splinters, miss, he warned. And if you get too cold, you stop and warm up by the fire. He indicated a small blaze they had built nearby. For the next hour, Danielle worked alongside the ranch hands, moving pieces of broken timber and shoveling snow. Her back ached, her fingers grew numb despite the gloves, but she refused to stop. Somewhere beneath this wreckage was the man she loved, the man she was supposed to marry in less than 2 weeks. She was lifting a piece of wood when she heard a shout from the other side of the collapsed structure. Over here, I found something. Everyone rushed to where a young ranch hand was frantically clearing snow. Danielle pushed her way through, her heart in her throat. As the men moved more debris, she caught a glimpse of a familiar brown coat. Brock, she cried, dropping to her knees and helping to clear away the snow and wood. More of him became visible: an arm, his chest, and finally his face, pale and still beneath a gash on his forehead. Danielle reached for him, but Marshall gently held her back as the men worked to carefully extract Brock from the wreckage. Is he? She couldn't finish the question. The cook pressed his ear to Brock's chest, then looked up with wide eyes. He's alive. I can hear a heartbeat. Relief made Danielle's legs give way, and she sank into the snow. Thank God, she whispered. Thank God. The men worked quickly, freeing Brock completely and carrying him to the fire. He remained unconscious, his breathing shallow, his skin alarmingly cold to the touch. A preliminary examination revealed no obviously broken bones, but the head wound was concerning, and there was no telling what internal injuries he might have suffered. We need to get him to town, to the doctor, Marshall decided. Johnson, ride ahead and make sure Doc Taylor is ready for us. One of the men mounted up and galloped off while the others fashioned a travois to transport Brock. Danielle sat by his side, holding his cold hand between hers, willing warmth and life back into him. Don't you dare leave me, she whispered fiercely. Do you hear me, Brock Evans? We have a wedding to attend. Our wedding. The journey back to town seemed to take an eternity. Danielle rode beside the travois, never taking her eyes off Brock's still form. Twice they stopped to check on him, and once he stirred slightly, though he didn't regain consciousness. By the time they reached Silver Creek, word of their approach had spread. A crowd had gathered outside the doctor's house, including Martha, who rushed forward to support Danielle as she dismounted stiffly from her horse. "They found him," Martha said, tears in her eyes. "Oh, thank the Lord they found him." The men carefully carried Brock inside while Danielle followed, her legs barely supporting her now that the immediate crisis was past. Dr. Taylor, a competent middle-aged man who had served as Silver Creek's only physician for 15 years, directed them to place Brock on the examination table. "Everyone out now," he ordered. "I need space to work." "I'm staying," Danielle said firmly, moving to Brock's side. Dr. Taylor looked as if he might argue, then apparently thought better of it. "Fine, but stay out of my way." For the next hour, the doctor worked methodically, cleaning and stitching the head wound, checking for broken bones, and monitoring Brock's breathing and pulse. Danielle assisted when asked, fetching water and bandages, holding a lamp for better light, and constantly watching for any sign that Brock was waking up. "Well, doctor," Taylor said finally, wiping his hands on a towel. "He's got a nasty concussion, some frostbite on his fingers and toes, and probably some bruised ribs from the collapse. But considering he spent 3 days trapped under a collapsed building in a blizzard, he's in remarkably good shape." "Will he recover?" Danielle asked, her voice small. "Barring complications, yes," the doctor assured her. "The next 24 hours are critical. If he wakes up and there's no sign of brain damage, his chances are excellent." "And if he doesn't wake up, doctor?" Taylor's expression grew more somber. "Then we have cause for concern, but let's not borrow trouble. Your young man is strong and healthy. That's in his favor." They moved Brock to a bed in the doctor's spare room where Danielle insisted on staying with him. "Doctor." Taylor provided her with a chair and blanket, showing her how to check Brock's pulse and what signs of improvement to watch for. "I'll be right next door if there's any change," he said, before leaving them alone. In the quiet of the small room, Danielle took Brock's hand in hers, careful of his bandaged fingers. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." The hours crept by. Danielle dozed intermittently in the chair, jerking awake at the slightest sound. Martha brought food that went largely uneaten and fresh clothes that Danielle changed into mechanically. Mr. Wilson stopped by with news that he was closing the mercantile for a few days, insisting that Danielle not worry about work until Brock was better. Night fell, and still Brock remained unconscious. Dr. Taylor checked on him regularly, his expression growing more concerned as the hours passed. "His vital signs are stable," he told Danielle, "but I'd feel better if he showed signs of waking." Around midnight, exhausted from the day's events, Danielle laid her head on the edge of the bed, still holding Brock's hand. "Please come back to me," she murmured before sleep claimed her. She was awakened sometime later by a slight pressure on her fingers. Lifting her head, she found Brock's eyes open, watching her with a mixture of confusion and relief. "Brock," she gasped, fully awake in an instant. "Danielle," he croaked, his voice hoarse from disuse. "What happened?" Tears of joy sprang to her eyes. "The line shack collapsed during the blizzard. You've been unconscious for nearly 4 days." He frowned slightly, wincing at the movement. 4 days, that's a long time." "Too long," she agreed, squeezing his hand carefully. "How do you feel?" "Like I got trampled by the entire herd," he admitted. "But alive, definitely alive. Doctor." Taylor, alerted by their voices, hurried into the room. After a brief examination, he pronounced himself cautiously optimistic. "Your fiancé refused to leave your side," he told Brock. "Probably saved your life, that kind of devotion." Brock's eyes found Danielle's, filled with a love so profound it took her breath away. "I'm not surprised. She's the strongest person I know." Over the next few days, Brock's recovery progressed steadily. The frostbite on his extremities proved less severe than initially feared, and while his head wound would leave a scar, there appeared to be no lasting damage. "By the end of the week, Doctor." Taylor reluctantly agreed that Brock could be moved to the boarding house, where Martha had prepared a ground floor room for his continued recovery. "You still need rest," the doctor cautioned. "No strenuous activity for at least 2 more weeks." Brock glanced at Danielle, who had rarely left his side during his recovery. "What about getting married? Is that considered strenuous?" Dr. Taylor chuckled. "Depends on how you go about it. But standing for a simple ceremony should be manageable by Christmas, if that's what you're asking." As Christmas approached, Brock regained his strength more rapidly than anyone had expected. Though still somewhat weak and sporting an impressive scar along his hairline, he was determined to be well enough for their wedding. Danielle divided her time between caring for him and finalizing the wedding arrangements with Martha's help. The cabin Brock had been building wouldn't be ready by Christmas, but Mr. Marshall generously offered them the use of the foreman's quarters at the Circle M, a small but comfortable 2-room structure separate from the main ranch house, until their own home was completed. 3 days before Christmas, as they sat together on the boarding house porch despite the cold, Brock took Danielle's hand in his. "I've been thinking about what happened," he said. "About how close I came to not making it back to you." "I try not to think about that," Danielle admitted, shivering slightly. "It made me realize something, though," he continued. "Life is unpredictable, especially out here. We can't take anything for granted." "What are you saying?" she asked, turning to face him. "I'm saying that I love you, Danielle James, more than I thought it was possible to love another person. And I promise that every day we have together, whether it's 50 years or 50 days, I will make count." Tears pricked at Danielle's eyes. "I love you too." "When I was trapped under that shack," Brock continued, "all I could think about was you. How I needed to get back to you, to see your smile again, to keep my promise to marry you on Christmas." Danielle leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "And here you are." "Here I am," he agreed. "A little worse for wear, but still here." Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow sparkling in the morning sunlight. The small church at the edge of town was decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and candles glowed in the windows as the townspeople of Silver Creek gathered to witness the marriage of Danielle James and Brock Evans. Danielle, dressed in her ivory satin gown with a wreath of holly berries in her hair, waited nervously in the church anteroom with Martha, who was serving as her matron of honor. "You look beautiful, dear," Martha said, adjusting the simple veil. "Brock won't know what hit him. Is he here?" Danielle asked anxiously. Despite his remarkable recovery, she couldn't help worrying about his health. "Arrived with Mr. Marshall 20 minutes ago," Martha assured her. "Standing straight and tall, though I noticed he's leaning on his cane a bit more than he'd like to admit." A knock at the door announced that it was time. Martha squeezed Danielle's hand encouragingly before opening the door to reveal Mr. Wilson, who had asked for the honor of escorting Danielle down the aisle in place of her father. "Ready, Miss James?" the old shopkeeper asked, offering his arm. "Ready, Mr. Wilson," she replied with a smile. "And after today, it will be Mrs. Evans." The small church was filled to capacity. It seemed the entire town had turned out for the occasion, along with the ranch hands from the Circle M and even a few travelers who happened to be passing through. But Danielle saw none of them. Her eyes were fixed solely on Brock, who stood at the altar awaiting her. He looked handsome in his new suit, his hair neatly combed, his face cleanly shaven. The scar on his forehead was still visible, but to Danielle, it was simply a reminder of how close she had come to losing him, and how precious their time together would be. As she reached his side, he took her hand, his blue eyes bright with emotion. "You're the most beautiful sight I've ever seen," he whispered. The ceremony was simple and moving. They exchanged the vows they had written themselves, promising to cherish and support each other through whatever life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Brock's kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The reception at the boarding house was a joyous affair, with food prepared by Martha and the other boarders, music provided by local musicians, and plenty of well wishes from the community that had embraced them both. Danielle, now officially Mrs. Evans, found herself overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection. "Are you happy, Mrs. Evans?" Brock asked as they shared a quiet moment together amidst the celebration. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "It still doesn't seem real sometimes." Brock's expression grew serious, his hand tightening around hers. "This can't be real," he whispered, echoing her words. Danielle looked up at him, confused. "What do you mean? This happiness, this love," he explained, his eyes never leaving hers. "It feels too perfect, too right, after everything we've both been through. Sometimes I wake up afraid it's all been a dream." Understanding filled her, and she reached up to touch his face. "Then I'll prove it's real every day you're here," she promised softly. As the winter snow melted and spring brought new life to the land, Brock and Danielle settled into their life together. The cabin was completed in February, a cozy two-room structure that Danielle made into a home with curtains sewn from fabric, ordered from the mercantile, and furniture crafted by Brock and the ranch hands. They established a routine, with Brock working as foreman at the Circle M while Danielle continued part-time at the mercantile, having insisted to Mr. Wilson that she wanted to keep her position even after marriage. The old shopkeeper was happy to accommodate her, especially as his arthritis was growing worse with each passing season. By summer, there was new excitement in their lives. Danielle confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks. She was expecting their first child, due to arrive sometime around Christmas, a year after their wedding. Brock's reaction to the news was everything she could have hoped for. He lifted her off her feet and spun her around, then immediately set her down again, apologizing profusely for the rough treatment. "A baby," he said in wonder, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you happy?" she asked, though his joy was evident. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he replied, kissing her tenderly. "I'm going to be a father. We're going to be parents." The months that followed were busy ones. Brock added a third room to the cabin for the nursery, and Danielle began sewing baby clothes and quilts. The whole town seemed to share in their joy, with women bringing gifts of handmade items for the baby and men offering Brock cigars in anticipation. In early December, as Danielle's time grew closer, a letter arrived that brought unexpected news. It was from the bank in Pueblo, addressed to Danielle. Inside was a formal notice informing her that with Walter Preston's death, the claims against her father's estate had been invalidated. The general store and all its contents, which had been held in legal limbo, were now officially hers. "What will you do?" Brock asked after she shared the contents of the letter. "Do you want to go back?" Danielle considered the question carefully. "No," she said finally. "Pueblo isn't home anymore. This is our home where our family is growing." She placed a hand on her rounded belly. "But I think I would like to sell the store and property. The money could help secure our future here." Brock nodded, understanding as always. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you." In the end, they arranged for a lawyer in Pueblo to handle the sale of the property. The proceeds, when they finally arrived months later, were more substantial than Danielle had expected. Enough to buy additional land adjacent to their homestead and to establish a small savings account for their child's future. But money matters were far from their minds on Christmas Eve, 1876, when Danielle went into labor just as the first snowflakes of a gentle storm began to fall. Brock rode to town to fetch Dr. Taylor, returning with both the doctor and Martha in tow. "Perfect timing," Martha declared as she helped Danielle walk the floor between contractions. "A Christmas baby, just like its parents' wedding day." The labor was long and difficult, stretching through the night and into Christmas morning. Brock remained by Danielle's side throughout, supporting her, wiping her brow, and whispering words of encouragement when her strength seemed to fail. As the sun rose on Christmas Day, casting golden light through the cabin windows, a new cry joined the household, strong, healthy, and indignant at being thrust into the cold world. "A boy," Dr. Taylor announced, placing the squalling infant on Danielle's chest. "A fine, sturdy boy." Brock stared in wonder at his son, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas James Evans after both their fathers. Thomas had Brock's blue eyes and a tuft of dark hair that promised to be the same rich chestnut as Danielle's. From his first day, it was clear he had inherited his father's strong constitution and his mother's determined spirit. As Danielle nursed their son in the quietude after Martha and the doctor had left, Brock sat beside the bed, his expression one of profound contentment. "1 year ago today, we were standing at that altar, promising to love each other forever," he reminded her. "And now look at us." Danielle smiled down at the tiny face of their son, then up at her husband. "Did you ever imagine we would be here? That day when you walked into the mercantile looking for coffee and tobacco?" "No," he admitted, "but I knew even then that something important had just happened. That my life had changed the moment I saw you." "I thought you were just another cowboy passing through," she teased gently. "Handsome, but probably not staying long." Brock reached over to brush a strand of hair from her forehead. "And now you're stuck with me, for good." "For good," she echoed, leaning into his touch. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As the years passed, the Evans family flourished. Their homestead grew along with their family. A daughter, Elizabeth Martha, joined them 2 years after Thomas, followed by another son, Samuel, 3 years later. Brock continued as foreman at the Circle M, eventually purchasing more land and establishing a small herd of his own, while Danielle took over the mercantile when Mr. Wilson finally retired. Silver Creek itself grew and changed with the times. The railroad arrived in 1880, bringing new prosperity and settlers to the area. A proper school was built, then a new church, and finally a bank. Through it all, Brock and Danielle remained constants in the community, respected and well-loved by all who knew them. On Christmas Eve, 1885, 10 years after they had first exchanged vows, they gathered in their expanded cabin, now a proper house with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. The children were finally asleep after the excitement of hanging stockings and setting out cookies for Santa, and Brock and Danielle sat together before the fire, enjoying a rare moment of quiet. 10 years, Danielle mused, her head resting on her husband's shoulder. "It's hard to believe." "The best 10 years of my life," Brock replied, kissing the top of her head, "though I expect the next 10 will be even better." Danielle smiled, thinking of all they had built together. "Do you remember what you said to me that Christmas, after Thomas was born?" "I said a lot of things that day," Brock chuckled. "I was somewhat overwhelmed." "You said you knew your life had changed the moment you saw me," she reminded him. I felt the same way, though I was too afraid to admit it then. Brock turned slightly to look at her. Afraid of me. Not of you, she clarified. Of what you made me feel. After losing my parents, especially my father, the way I did, I was terrified of caring for anyone again, of being vulnerable. And now, he asked softly, now I know that loving someone is always a risk, she said thoughtfully. But a life without love isn't really living. You taught me that, Brock Evans. He drew her closer, his arms strong around her shoulders. We taught each other, and we're teaching our children. That's the best legacy we can leave them. As the fire crackled and snow fell gently outside the window, Danielle thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, the grief that had driven her from Pueblo, the chance encounter at the mercantile, the blizzard that had nearly taken Brock from her, and all the quiet, beautiful moments that had filled the decades since. When I first came to Silver Creek, I never imagined I could be this happy again, she confessed. It seemed impossible. This can't be real, Brock murmured, echoing the words she had whispered to him on their wedding day. Danielle smiled, completing the exchange that had become a private ritual between them over the years. Then I'll prove it's real every day you're here. And I'll do the same for you, Brock promised, sealing his words with a kiss that still, after all these years, made her heart race. Every day we have together. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the land in a blanket of pristine white. Inside the warmth of the home they had built, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had created together, Brock and Danielle Evans held each other close, grateful for the past, content in the present, and hopeful for the future, a future they would face as they had faced everything else. Side by side, hand in hand, heart to heart. And in the quiet of the Christmas Eve night, with the promise of children's laughter and joy to come with the morning light, they both knew with absolute certainty that what they had found together in this small corner of the Arizona territory was not just real, it was the most real thing either of them had ever known. A love born of chance, tested by tragedy, and strengthened through years of shared dreams, challenges, and triumphs. A love that would continue to grow and flourish, proving itself real with each new day for all the days to come.